There is one big change to all of this, of course, and that is the board are now the people who are physically responsible. So they are the ones who are going to get hit. And quite often or not, the board are not necessarily technologists, okay? They could be financiers, they could be legal, they could be technologists, they could be entrepreneurs, they could be from all walks of life, but not necessarily understanding what cybersecurity actually is, right? So does the board really understand what responsibility means for information and cybersecurity? And when I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who was a CISO at a large multinational, and his view was, yes, you provide all of these highlights and lowlights and you report on your KRIs and everything else, but it's vastly different in that you have to educate them on the depth and breadth of the information security that you have. Turning it away from an IT conversation and into an enterprise operational risk conversation is very much the first part. Because if you think about it, if your board are not full of technologists, they're not really going to understand where you're coming from. So you need to be able to turn that conversation into a language that can be understood clearly at the board level. The other thing as well is we see a lot of this when we're talking about lots of different standards. So is CPS 234 a rigid standard, right? The fact that there is a CPS 234 guide, to me, indicates that no, it isn't, right? Whilst there are guides there, that means there is potential for ambiguity. And it all comes back down to how do we implement a strategy that fits our security framework that also addresses the requirements of CPS 234. So like all standards, they need to be taken into context and the way that your organization works to ensure that they fit with your existing framework, such as the likes of COBIT, ITIL, ISO, etc., etc., etc. So building all of these things together and having a cohesive IT security framework helps you address multiple different streams of operational and business risk, so that you can really explain this at a plain English level to your board members. So then we've got to look at, okay, well, we've implemented all of these things and CPS 234 is now in place. And how is this actually going to be enforced? Now, again, this is another area for consternation, I think, in a lot of organizations, in that whilst it is a standard and it comes out with a guide, there are requirements that obviously are very, very clear requirements, and some are not so clear. So that allows ambiguity to creep into the minds of, say, an external auditor, for example. How will those external auditors actually measure compliance and adherence to 234? Many large organizations have extensive resources available, to help them in their maturing processes and framework. But when you're quite a lean organization, how do you actually manage all of these things? It becomes very, very difficult without the support of the board in order to help you address their needs. So highlighting this as a business risk to the board is paramount, because you need to get their buy-in to add additional resources where needed, because ultimately they are the ones responsible. And for a board member to turn around and say, well, we can't do that then it's our role as business leaders to turn around back to the board and say, well, okay, that's fair enough. I really understand where you're coming from with that, and in normal circumstances, I would agree. However, the actual real risk to us as a business and you now as a board member related to this is X, Y, and Z. And from that, I've actually seen organisations turn around to their board and where funding had not been forthcoming for a particular project, and the CISO at the organisation turned around to a particular board member and said, okay, if you're not allowing me to proceed with this project, do you realise that means that you are physically liable should something happen? And within 25 days, that project was back on track and actually had more people attached to it than were there originally. So having that open dialogue and making people understand what that risk actually means could actually be a benefit to you and your organisations as well. So as I said, ultimate responsibility really relies with the board. It's a clear indication for APRA regulated entities that the board will be asking questions of the business, okay, to ensure that their own personal risk is mitigated. At the end of the day, we all have to, as individuals, we all have to abide by privacy rules and regulations. We all have codes of ethics that we agree to as we work for organisations. But more importantly, where there is a reporting responsibility, there are lots of other implications as well. So those board members who might not just be on your board, they might actually be on many different organisations' boards. How are they then impacted? And what does that then mean to you? Can you actually address the questions that they're asking? So it's a significant change to what the business may feel is important. So we might be going down one road thinking that this is the most important thing that we need to do from a data protection perspective or an IT security perspective. But the board then go, hang on a second, does that actually help reduce my risk? And if you can't justify that, then the possibility of that project continuing may be diminished. So as I said before, we've already seen some organisations having to change direction on projects to ensure that the concerns of the board are actually addressed. So I always look at this as an opportunity, and I think we all have the opportunity in our organisations where previously if you have a project that you really think would be really beneficial, but you've never ever been granted the budget for, by highlighting and educating the board to their own risk exposure that could be remediated against by providing a solution or a new framework or whatever it is, or even an education program, that could be where money is freed up or additional resources are provided to you, or you could leverage some technology from within a wider group organization. And so all of these things are good, but you may really to be having that conversation with your board members and keeping them up to date on progress. And look out for areas where technology can help address overall business risk. I say this with tongue in cheek, right? In that I'm not a huge believer, and I'm working for a technology company, I'm not a huge believer at throwing technology at a problem. One area that I think is incredibly important is to have the correct frameworks in place. And by having those correct frameworks in place, only then can you identify where your gaps possibly are, and then you can take some guidance on which products and services may be beneficial to remediate against those gaps. So let's look at adapting our security and risk management frameworks to ensure that CPS 234 is taken into consideration as part of that. And there's a lot of things in CPS 234, by the way, which are which are common sense. A lot of stuff is that you're already doing, and and so on, right? So you're probably going to be able to look at different areas within the organization to say, okay, look, I'm going to invest in a particular technology to address a particular risk. So the other question that I've seen as well is, do you actually have the right relationships with the board? Now that's a great topic for conversation. What I've seen in organizations that has worked really, really well is having a good relationship manager or a good advocate that can explain cyber threats to the business in terms often overlooked. Okay, so having somebody who can really explain what those scenarios actually are and what they actually mean are actually invaluable. Just take that into consideration when you're looking at different areas. Now, this is taken from the Ponemon report. And what they've said, based on the information that they've extrapolated over the last 4 years when they've been doing these reports, are where technology potentially or services or processes that you might then implement could actually be cost mitigators. So when we look at the cost of an overall data breach, we automatically think of, okay, well, we're going to get fined. We're going to be hit with regulations or sanctions of some kind. But what we actually find is that if certain technologies are actually utilized within an organization, depending upon their use and where they're used, they could actually be a benefit in terms of cost mitigation in going on. So one of the things that has come up in many different organizations is the ability to build security, and GDPR covers this a little bit, as part of privacy by design, for example. So building security at the very, very start and ensuring that privacy is actually taken into consideration. And I think that's great for brand new things, but then having to rework a lot of projects and a lot of systems right at the very, very end, or even if it's a legacy system, could actually be incredibly difficult to do. But in order to comply with the regulation, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can do that. So DevSecOps, for example, is a good example of that, in that building that additional capability into your software development actually provides some good security control.